If you love wisdom, put your mind up to the ceiling. Don't let it stay in the gutter. Don't let your heart get all cluttered. No, I did not stutter. Listen to all that I've muttered. Your life will only go well if you win wisdom or lovers.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
You and I. You and I.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
Hey, what's going on, and a happy Thursday. This is JC Johnson, and you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And today we're talking about the wisdom of objectivity. So we're going to be discussing how we can make sound decisions and be more objective in our thinking and our dealings with people. So you definitely don't want to miss this one. We'll be playing a couple of songs, but we'll be right back after this, so make sure that you don't go anywhere.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside.
Hey, what's going on, Wisdom family? Each week on For the Love of Wisdom, we promote a new and free audiobook that we believe you will benefit from and become wiser by listening to. On today's show, we're talking about the wisdom of objectivity. And so, the recommended book for this week is The Art of Critical Decision Making by Professor Michael A. Roberto. This book is about how you can make effective decisions so that you can make awesome life choices, both personally and in business. To download this free book today, just visit audibletrial.com/lovewisdom. audibletrial.com/lovewisdom.
Hey, good afternoon. This is JC Johnson for The Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And of course, you know you're listening on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. All right, so on today's show, we're going to be talking about the wisdom of objectivity. Last week, we discussed finality, right? So just as a quick recap, and if you're new to the show, I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what it's all about. This show is a show about philosophy, and that's why we call the show For the Love of Wisdom. And you may ask, what does that have to do with philosophy? Well, the word philosophy can be broken down into two different words. It can be broken down into two Greek words. The first one, philo, means love, and the second one, sophos, means wisdom. So when you put them together, it means love of wisdom, right? And wisdom means good sense or judgment, right? So this show is about the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment, and how we can apply that to our lives to make good decisions. Now, one verse that really stands out to me that I think is a good representation of the show is from Psalm 90 verse 12. That's in the Bible. It says, "Teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts." Okay, and I think that that's what life is really all about. If you want to be successful in life, if you want to make good decisions, then you have to have wisdom. You have to be in a place where you are doing what is right, doing what is the most beneficial for you and other people who are in your lives, because everything that you do not only affects you, but really affects everyone around you. So that's really important. Last week on For the Love of Wisdom, we discussed the wisdom of finality. And finality is the fact or impression of being an irreversible ending, the character or condition of being final, settled, irrevocable, or complete, right? So one quote from Joseph Campbell that we mentioned on the show last time was, "We must be willing to get rid of the life we've planned, so as to have the life that is waiting for us. The old skin has to be shed before the new one can come." Right? And that's pretty good. Definitely, it was a great couple of episodes. We were joined by Will the Thrill and Shauna as well. So if you missed those two episodes, don't worry about it, because you can always check them out again. You can download them for free on iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Google Play Music, or iHeartRadio as well. You can also listen to the show on any Alexa device just by saying, "Alexa, play For the Love of Wisdom." Right? So, go online today, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, depending on whatever you like. I prefer iTunes. You might prefer something else like Spotify or iHeart. Whatever is your preference, you'll be able to listen to the show on there. Okay, so today, since we're discussing objectivity, I want to make sure that we all have an understanding of what objectivity is about, so that when we're having this conversation, it will make sense. And definitely, speaking of conversation, if you want to join the conversation today, you can hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @LoveWisePodcast. And in your response, just make sure to use the hashtag For the Love of Wisdom, and you can use the hashtag North Coast Underground or NCU Radio. All right, so objectivity. All right, if we're looking at objectivity, we need to understand just that first part of the word objective. That's a word that a lot of us are familiar with. So, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, an objective, or being objective, is existing independent of or external to the mind. Something, that's actual or real, objective reality. Right? So this is not just based on what it is in our mind, but this is based upon what everybody can see, not just us. And it's based on observable phenomena. So it's based on objective facts. These are things that can be proven, things that can be tested and seen. It's uninfluenced by emotions or personal prejudices. Now, this is really important for what we're going to talk about today, because that's what it's all about. It's about being able to make a decision, not just based upon what we think, but really based upon what is true. And in society today, there are a lot of people that don't believe in truth, or at least that truth is absolute. And that's something we're going to discuss as well. And I think that is really important, regardless of how you feel about it. This show is going to be challenging for you. We're going to present a lot of information, but I think it's something that's going to be beneficial for everyone. So, another definition from the American Heritage Dictionary for objective is actually looking at the word objectivism. It's a philosophy term, and one of the several doctrines. This is one of the several doctrines that's holding that all reality is objective and external to the mind, and that knowledge is reliably based on observed objects and events. All right, so that's objectivity, but what is subjectivity? Because that's the antonym, right? So if you were to contrast objectivity with subjectivity, you'll see that subjectivity is dependent on or taking place in a person's mind rather than the external world. So I might say strawberries taste good, right? And that is my subjective reality, because I believe that strawberries taste good. However, Susie Q down the street may be allergic to strawberries, so she may say, oh, strawberries are horrible. Nobody should eat strawberries, right? And maybe that's her opinion, that no one should eat strawberries, because that's based on her experience. That is being subjective. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with being subjective in that sense, but we do have to be careful. There are some instances where being subjective is good, though. So here's an example. Art is subjective, right? So if every artist painted the same paintings, or they made the same music, then it wouldn't be any fun, right? How would we get anything out of it? How would we say this person is unique? Why would somebody want a Basquiat painting when they can get a Rembrandt painting if they were all the same, right? Because they paint from their perspective. Artists, they make music from their perspective. They as far as the lyrics, they talk about their own life experiences. Maybe when it comes to the music production, the way that they make their music might be a little bit different from the next person, just based on the way that they view music. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're being subjective in the way that they're producing their art, right? So if even a film director, anyone like that, if they were to make a film, and they were to make a film just like whatever the most popular film is from that time, if they were to just do what everyone else is doing, then there would be nothing that we can get out of it, because nothing that they do would stand out, right? So being subjective can be good in that sense. Or how about this for a writer? Someone who writes an autobiography. That autobiography is subjective because it's written from that author's perspective. They're not necessarily writing for other people. They're more so writing to tell other people what their story is, what their life experiences have been, and what they've got out of that. Now, there may be someone else who writes another book that contradicts what that person said because their reality is different, and that's fine. They are being subjective in that sense. However, a good story, or even a good autobiography, even if they are speaking subjectively about their life experiences, they are able to bring it back around to an objective truth. They're able to say, okay, this is what I've been through, this is how it has influenced how I see the world, but ultimately this is how it can apply to your life. This is what you can take out of it. This is something that is a universal truth that, regardless of who you are, will be true for you, right? So that's just something that's important to keep in mind. When we come back, we're gonna look a little bit more at this word objectivity, and we're gonna discuss how this relates to wisdom. So you are listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets, and I am JC Johnson here on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. We got a pretty cool song coming up. I think that you're gonna enjoy it. Here it is.
This is your girl, Juicy Jazzo, and I wanted to let you know I'm all about wisdom. Knowledge is power, power is money, and money makes the world go round. And you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom right now, bleeding out your speakers.
All right, welcome back to For the Love of Wisdom. This is JC Johnson on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about the wisdom of objectivity. That's the topic for today. And we discussed how being objective ultimately is a good thing. However, there are times when being subjective is appropriate. And we gave some examples as far as an artist or a musician. They may be subjective, like a painter is subjective in the way that they paint. A musician is subjective in the way that they produce a song. And that's fine because they're doing it from their perspective. A person that writes an autobiography is also writing it from their perspective. So it doesn't mean just because they wrote it that it's, all correct. Not everything that somebody puts in a book is true, right? But, the hope is that you'll be able to take something out of what that person said because they're just telling you about their personal experiences and their personal perspective. But life requires us to think a little bit beyond just what we think and how we see the world. Because in order to be successful and truly connect with others, we have to be able to look outside of ourselves. So, essentially, again, being objective is about making judgments. It's about making judgment calls. And the word wisdom, remember that word wisdom means judgment. It's the ability to discern inner qualities and relationships or have good sense. So we have to make judgment calls every day. That happens whether we like it or not. And there's nothing wrong with having an opinion about something or someone. So you will hear people say oftentimes, hey, you can't judge, don't judge me. Now, in a sense, that's true because you shouldn't judge people without having the proper information. However, if you steal $20 from someone and they catch you and they say, hey, you stole my money, that's wrong. You can't say, hey, don't judge me. No, they're gonna say, hey, you better give me my money back, right? So you can find yourself in a problem, right, if you do that. But basically that person, they made a judgment. They saw something and they have an opinion about it, and they responded to it as a result. And that's what making judgments is. That's what making a good judgment is. So there's nothing wrong with judging a person or a situation as long as it's done in truth. The negative part of judgment is when you're looking at a person poorly based upon prejudice, based upon your own decisions or your own experiences, I should say, without really knowing that person or knowing the motives of that person. So looking at the word prejudice, right? Just think about it. Prejudice. So it's like prejudging. It means that you're making a judgment prior to having the proper amount of information needed to make that judgment. And that's what we don't want to do, because that's being subjective. But in order to be objective, we have to make a judgment about something. Someone once said, if you take away my ability to judge, it's like taking away my ability to distinguish the differences between someone like Adolf Hitler and Mother Teresa, right? Because you can't just say, well, hey, they're both, exactly the same. There's nothing different about them. I don't want to judge. No, that doesn't make any sense. If a child molester is harming your child, you're not going to say, well, I don't want to judge. Let me just close the door and just let them do what they do. No, you're going to get in there and you're going to do something about it quickly. You're not even going to think about it really quick. You're going to just make a judgment instantly, right? Because that's what we do. We do that every day. You make judgment calls all the time. You think, should I have Captain Crunch or should I have something more healthy like Wheaties or something, right? You make that decision. It's a judgment. It doesn't mean that you think that Captain Crunch is evil or something like that, but you say, hey, it's just not the best choice for me. I'm making a judgment call about something that's better for me, right? So there are times though when something is, no matter what, it's not based on opinion, right? Some things are just what they are, regardless of how you feel about it. And since I spoke about Mother Teresa and Hitler, I wanted to share this article. This article was written in 2008, and it was written by somebody, I think, who has been through some difficult situations. And I don't agree with everything this person says, but I think that what he had to say was really important, and it helps to really spark the conversation today about objectivity and about good and evil, because whether you see it that way or not, that's kind of what it all boils down to, really. So here in this article, it's called The Myth of Good and Evil, from Hitler to Mother Teresa. So we spoke about both of them, so I think this is fitting. And one thing he said here I thought was really interesting. He said, I admit that I have never met Adolf Hitler. Fortunately for this blog post, however, I have met Mother Teresa. So he did meet Mother Teresa. He said that he met her back in Canada in 1984. And here's what he had to say. He said, I shook her hand and she sneered. I said a few words, basic niceties of some sort, and she just glowered at me. Interesting. Not really what you would think of when you think of Mother Teresa, right? So he says, after about 3 seconds, she turned to the security people with her and she said, get rid of him. And they did. And then he has this to say, I suspect I would have done better meeting Hitler. Now, sounds like a person who was a little bit hurt. I'm sorry that Mother Teresa hurt your feelings, but yeah, it's interesting that he has that to say. Then he goes on to say, years later, I learned that Mother Teresa had a disdain for males. And ultimately, his final conclusion there is no ultimate evil in the world any more than there is ultimate good. And he said that based upon just an interaction with a person that most people would consider to be the epitome of good. But the problem is when you look at a human being as the standard for goodness, that human being is always going to fall short because nobody is perfect. So you can't look at Mother Teresa and say, well, if she was rude to me, then that means there is no good in the world. That's not how it works. See, his perspective in this case is subjective. But I mention it because I think that he represents how a lot of people feel. A lot of people would say, hey, there is no good and evil. So as a Christian, I can't agree with his statement, but I will say that I understand why he says it. because people have a hard time believing in good versus evil. It almost sounds sometimes like some sort of fairy tale or a cartoon. Just picture the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, stuff like that. Those kind of images oftentimes just appear in people's minds as folklore, not as something that is reality. So when people think of good versus evil, it's hard for them to really see it that way, see it as something that is actually occurring in their lives. But there is good and evil. Both of those things are happening around us at all times. Even look at movies. Almost every movie has the same plot. It's the idea of good versus evil. From Disney movies to intense horror films, right? There's always some kind of moral battle between good and evil. Even if it's a cartoon. Should I lie and say I ate ice cream before dinner? I don't want to get in trouble. Maybe I should say I didn't eat the ice cream or whatever. From that to mass murder, right? Every type of story, it seems to deal with this idea of trying to make the right decision, doing what's right versus doing what's wrong, right? And they're trying to make this decision based on an objective reality, because some things are just considered universally to be true. Lying to someone is universally considered bad, right? But more on that after this. You're listening to NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the underground starts with you.
It's your boy, Tear It Up, Tommy Tom from Beyond Sports, and you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom
with your host, Jason Johnson.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. And today the show topic is the wisdom of objectivity. All right, that's what we are talking about today. We are talking about how we can make objective decisions, right, in a world where a lot of people see things from a subjective perspective. And before the break, we looked at an article that was written by a guy who was a little bit hurt. He had a bad experience. He met Mother Teresa, who most people would consider to be a good person. However, she treated him rudely. So it kind of tainted his perspective of her. And in turn, it kind of made him have a view of the world as not a place where good and evil exists, but just a place where people just are people, right? And I don't agree with what he had to say, but I hear where he's coming from. I hear his heart, and it's saddening that he had a negative experience that shaped his perspective. But that happens all the time. We go through things in life, and it can cause us to think of things more subjectively than objectively. But what we're doing today is looking at how we can better make objective decisions and have an objective view of the world, regardless of how we personally feel about things that we have experienced in our lives. Okay, so most people, right, whether they want to admit it or not, they have an internal inclination towards doing what is good. Okay, so unless a person is a narcissist, right, they're gonna feel bad if they do something that's wrong, right? And they may be hard on themselves. They know that they should be doing right. They want to do better. They want to act better, better. They want to be better, right? And that's why, as bad as the world is, right, you hear about bad things happening all the time. You hear about evil happening all the time. You hear about people being kidnapped and people being murdered, right? People being raped. All this stuff happens. However, if you think about it, as bad as those things are, not every human being does all of those things every day. I mean, just imagine if every time you walked outside, you knew that you would experience every single evil thing that could possibly happen in the world, in your life, every day. That would make the world a much scarier place, right? So not to make light of the bad things that do happen, but however, there is a kind of human goodness, right? there are universal truths that all of us believe in. Whether or not you believe in absolute truth, it seems that everybody does hold some truths to be absolute, right? So your next door neighbor, they most likely, regardless of what they believe about truth, they're probably not going to just go and murder somebody just because that person looked at them wrong. Now, there are people that do that, but that doesn't represent the 8 billion people in the world, right? So not everyone does the same things, right? Just how one person may steal a car, but there may be, 4 billion other people who wouldn't steal a car, right? So we have to understand that there is a measure of grace, I think, that God gives to the world, and mercy, because without that, I think that things would be much more chaotic than they are. We would see a lot more craziness, a lot more hardship, a lot more evil. Okay, so with that in mind, though, I want to look at Barack Obama's speech he gave a couple days ago at the 2018 Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. Now, this, I think, really ties into what we're talking about today. Here's what Barack Obama had to say in regards to truth. He said, "What was true then remains true today. Basic truths do not change. It is a truth that can be embraced by the English, and by the Indian, and by the Mexican, and by the Bantu, and by the Luo, and by the American. It is a truth that lies at the heart of every world religion, that we should do unto others as we would have them do unto us." Right? And he got a lot of applause for that statement, but what he's saying is true. That is a truth that is absolute, regardless of what you believe in, regardless of what your religion is or what your life experiences are. There are some things that all of us have to do in order to be proper citizens of this world. And one of those things is to treat others as we would want to be treated, right? Because that's what life is really about at a basic level. It goes deeper than that, but at a basic level, that's what we need to keep in mind. We should be treating others as we want to be treated. Here's something else that he said in his speech. So Barack Obama said that we see ourselves in other people, that we can recognize common hopes and common dreams, and it is a truth that is incompatible with any form of discrimination based on race or religion or gender or sexual orientation. And it is a truth that, by the way, when embraced, actually delivers practical benefits, since it ensures that a society can draw upon the talents and energy and skill of all its people. Right? And that was powerful. He's saying a lot there, right? He says we see ourselves in other people. It's easy to maybe make a judgment about someone, right? Let's just say somebody does you wrong, or they say something to you that you don't like, and you let this person know, hey, what you said to me was wrong, and this person feels bad about it. But maybe you choose not to forgive them because to you think it's just too harsh. It's just too much to deal with, right? But then maybe a year later, you're in a situation where the same thing happens to you. However, in this case, someone else is on the receiving end and you're the offender. And now you're the person that's looking for forgiveness. You're the person that's looking for grace from that other person. And maybe that person does or doesn't give it to you. But in that moment, hopefully, if you're open-minded and if your heart is pliable enough, you'll go into that situation or come away from that situation saying, wow, I really need to be more understanding, because the things that I don't like about other people, I see those things in me too, right? And that is a truth that we can't escape. Okay, so regardless of how you feel about yourself or about where you are in life or who you are, you have to admit that you have a lot of imperfections. And when you're able to see that, then you're also going to be able to see that, okay, I need to be able to give grace to this other person that has imperfections, because none of us have it all together, right? So I think that was pretty good. Here's another thing that Barack Obama had to say in his speech. He said, embracing one common humanity does not mean that we have to abandon our unique ethnic and national religious identities. Okay? Our unique ethnic and national and religious identities. So being open-minded doesn't necessarily mean forget everything that I've grown up to believe. I need to forget all that so that I can live in this utopia where we all have the same religion and we all like the same kind of ice cream and we all listen to the same kind of music. No, that's not reality. That's something that doesn't happen, right? There are plenty of different perspectives. The challenge in life, and I guess the skill that you can acquire if you want to really be successful in life, is being able to live in the midst of all different types of ideas that are different from your own. All right, you're listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. We'll be right back.
You're now listening to For the Love of Wisdom on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the underground starts with who? No other but you.
All right, welcome back. You were listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. All right, now on today's episode, we are talking about the wisdom of objectivity, and we're about to end hour 1, and we'll be back on hour 2. We'll still be discussing the same topic. And remember that if you missed it, you can always go back and listen to the previous episodes on iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, or Google Play Music, right? And pretty much all you have to do is just, if you can't remember any of that, just type in For the Love of Wisdom in a Google search, and you should be able to find it. Just search for the Love of Wisdom, JC Johnson, and you should be able to pull that up on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Now, today we are talking about objectivity. We're talking about how we can make objective decisions and not be subjective in our thinking and in our dealings with people. And we were looking at a speech that Barack Obama gave at the 2018 Nelson Mandela annual lecture. And there, Barack Obama did touch on a lot of what we're talking about today. He talked about truth. He talked about the importance of it. And he talked about how we see ourselves in other people. He says we can recognize common hopes and common dreams, right? And that also means that we can recognize failures. We can recognize weakness as well as strengths. That helps us to be more understanding of other people, right? When we're able to look at things from that perspective. So Obama speaks a lot of truth in his speech. He speaks about a lot of truth, I should say. So what is truth, actually? Now, there's a doctrine in philosophy that's known as absolute truth. And this is a truth that is compared to relativity, or what is called sometimes as relative truth. So what are the differences? Okay, so a really good resource here is allaboutphilosophy.org. And they actually wrote a lot about absolute truth. And on here they say that absolute truth is defined as inflexible reality, fixed, invariable, unalterable facts. For example, it is a fixed, invariable, unalterable fact that there are absolutely no square circles and there are absolutely no round squares, right? And I think that we can all agree with that. Some truths are absolute. Now, if a person says that they're eating a pizza, right, and you ask them, okay, cool, what kind of pizza do you have? They say, well, it's a different kind of pizza. There's no sauce, there's no dough, so there's no bread, there's no cheese, and there's no toppings. So if a person says something like that to you, you'll say, well, I mean, I hate to break it to you, but you're not eating a pizza. I don't know what it is, but it's not a pizza, because a pizza, in order to be properly called a pizza, has to have certain elements, right? Now, some people have white sauce on their pizza. Some people have marinara sauce on their pizza. Some people don't put any sauce on their pizza, right? But it can still be considered a pizza. Some people put pepperoni on it. Some people put anchovies on it. It doesn't make it any more or less of a pizza. But if you take away all of the essential ingredients and elements that are what identify that as pizza, then we can no longer call it pizza. And it's the same with absolute truth. If we're saying that we believe something, it needs to be based on fact. It needs to be based on reality and not just what we want it to be. So one thing that the author of this article goes on to say is that while absolute truth is a logical necessity, there are some religious orientations, atheistic humanists, for example, who argue against the existence of absolute truth. And I think this is interesting that he says religious orientations as it relates to atheists, because most of the time if a person is an atheist, you would think that they are non-religious, right? But he's actually saying that this is a religion. And why is that? So he says here that they argue against the existence of absolute truth. Humanism's exclusion of God necessitates moral relativism. This is something here from a humanist, John Dewey, who's the co-author and signer of the Humanist Manifesto. He said, "There is no God and there is no soul. Hence, there are no needs for the props of traditional religion. With dogma and creed excluded, then immutable truth is also dead and buried. There's no room for fixed natural law or moral absolutes." So that right there really characterizes how many people in the world that we live in think. We live in an age of postmodernism, and with postmodernism, the idea is that there is nothing that we can pinpoint to say this is absolute truth. What they would say rather is, hey, if this is what you believe, that's fine, but I'm going to believe what I believe. And as long as we all believe in something, it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. Now, with some things, that is true, right? With some things, you can be subjective. Like if I say I prefer cookies and cream ice cream, and I think that that tastes better than just plain vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream, I have the right to say that. You know, that's my reality. That's what I believe. However, I don't have the right to tell someone else who prefers Rocky Road ice cream that there's something wrong with that, right? Because that's their opinion. That's what they like. I can't argue with that. So I can't say what I like is the truth and any other ice cream doesn't even exist. It's not even real because I don't like it. No, I can't say that. That would be irresponsible, and it actually wouldn't make any sense to say, right? Because we all know that there are different flavors, and that is being subjective, and that's okay. But what we're talking about is objectivity and absolute truth, and how there are some things that we can't get around. Like, it is not okay to murder someone, regardless of how you feel about it, right? So regardless of what you think or I think, that's just something that's true. So more on that in hour 2. You're listening on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you.
Knowledge is power, power is money, and money makes the world go round.
Money, power, respect. I get it higher, learning. Yeah, I'm with it. Only get better with time. Keep got on my mind with wisdom. There's no limit. There's no limit. Get up and get it. Can achieve the impossible. Conquer every obstacle. Exhaustively grinding, constantly pushing. Do what they say I could. Life is what you make it. Knowledge is power. Don't let them take it. If you're in love with wisdom.